we don't show up at work as someone that we're not outside of work, like we're the same person. If you are an inclusive leader, then what does that look like? And how do you show up outside of work? And where are the gaps?
This is Lorraine Copes, award-winning entrepreneur, speaker, consultant, writer and founder of community interest company Be Inclusive Hospitality.
Our mission is to build a future hospitality that's fair and inclusive for all.
Lorraine previously worked in procurement for brands such as Green King, TGI Fridays, Shake Shack and Gordon Ramsay restaurants, to name a few, and is a member of the board of directors for the Wine and Spirits Trade Association. In this conversation, we discuss how hospitality leaders can make their workplaces more inclusive. So, Lorraine, lots to dig into and talk about. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. For those that don't know about Be Inclusive Hospitality, could you go into a little more detail about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So we are as you mentioned, a social enterprise, not-for-profit organisation, and our mission is to build a future hospitality that's fair and inclusive for all. We have a specialism in race, and the business falls into two halves. So the first is that we access funding and sponsorship to deliver professional development programs that support Black, Asian, and ethnic minority employees or founders in hospitality to succeed. And so that can include anything from mentorship schemes, qualifications, educational trips. We have an awards ceremony. It's all around supporting ultimately marginalized communities to succeed in an industry that is widely enjoyed and loved. And then the second half is that we are an equity, diversity, and inclusion consultancy. So we work with regional and national brands to help them be more inclusive. And we support them with education, so workshops, training, as well as consultancy services. We help them with data analysis and ultimately are a key collaborator across the industry for businesses that want to move the dial forward on all things inclusion and equity. So that's who we are. One final thing to add actually is that everything that we do is really underpinned by research. So to date, we've produced 4 pieces of research, which include industry surveys as well as reviewing ONS data. And these findings have led us to kind of the company objectives and how we deliver our mission. And, our research is available to download free on our website, but it told us that 43% of people of colour in the industry believe that their race has hindered career progression, that 1 in 5 hospitality respondents, and that's of 4,000, have accessed education and training around ED&I. Unfortunately, 33% have experienced racism at work, and there's a real lack of knowledge and awareness of what employers are actually doing to move the dial forward. So the research has really, as I say, led us on the path that we're on.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I'll be sure to put links to those in show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'll put that in the description as well. So they're good starting points. And I think when we first spoke about doing this session, I was saying to you that I sort of feel like this is a good starting point, at least. If people are wanting to make change in their organisation, or if they're hopefully in a leadership position and sort of are able to sort of drive that forward as well. Sometimes people don't know where to start. So getting educated is a very good starting point, at least. I want to take you back to earlier in your career. So how did you get started in events and hospitality?
So I studied logistics at university, and then that led me to my first role, which was forecasting and planning for a joint venture for a pub group. So at the time, Punch Pub Company and the Spirit Group, who are obviously now Green King, they had a supply chain and procurement arm, which was a joint venture. So my career started there. And it was in that role that I realised it was possible for me to eat and drink for free. And I love food and drink. And from there, I then pursued the path more towards procurement than supply chain, and then kind of worked my way up. So my first buying role was at Elior Contract Caterer. And then from then on, I kind of moved up and forward, obviously working in fine dining, casual dining. And yeah, the past sort of 12 to 13 years, I have been procurement director on the exec boards for brands like the Gordon Ramsay Group, Corbin and King, and Shake Shack.
Did you have a preference? You know, obviously you've worked at sort of diverse range of sort
Yeah,
of hospitality setups. Did you have a
yeah,
preference, or was it just sort of interesting to sort of meet the
yeah. I
challenges of that
mean,
particular place?
yeah, I think, being a real lover of food and drink, there's real joy in being able to buy food and drink for brands that you respect and admire. And the Gordon Ramsay Group is an example. You know, the breadth of different types of food and drinks and wine and spirits that they would buy across their 14 restaurants made for a really great and interesting role, and my time there was phenomenal as a result. And at the time, actually, we set up a procurement department from scratch, and recruited a team to deliver the strategy. So that was definitely the most fun as far as dynamic, interesting business and their needs would ultimately, serve our work. So I would
Mm.
definitely say that somewhere between Shake Shack and the Gordon Ramsay Group were my two favorites. And that's from a
Mm.
doing the do. So market entry launch for Shake Shack versus building a procurement department in an established business for Gordon Ramsay. But the common thread between the two is just amazing food that I could eat every day. So yeah.
Amazing food, amazing people, amazing setups. That's what we want, isn't it? I think again, going back to our sort of our conversation when we were planning this session, I think it's really important that people know that, because you don't often see procurement and supply chain because it is all sort of behind the
You
scenes, but
don't.
there's such a
Yeah,
range of career options for people, even if
there
they
are.
are. So you spent big chunk of your career in procurement and supply chain, and then in 2020 you set up Be Inclusive Hospitality. Was this like a light bulb moment, or was it sort of a gradual process where you thought, right, I have to do
Yeah,
this?
I think it was definitely gradual. I think when you are like a person of color in the industry, especially when you kind of become more and more senior and you're looking around at an extremely diverse industry, and kind of acknowledging that in the rooms that you're in, whether that is a boardroom or whether that's events, that there's very few people that look like you in any of those rooms, that
Mm.
becomes an ongoing frustration. And I love procurement and I loved my time buying food and drink across the industry. But I've always been someone that thought a lot about purpose, and I also recognised maybe about 6 years ago that I enjoy my day job, but I really love supporting others to move forwards and upwards more. And so I had the idea pre-pandemic, but the time and space of the pandemic allowed me the time to write a business plan and launch the business. So I would say that everything that I had done up until that point prepared me for where I am here and now. But I've never also been the kind of person that sits thinking, "Oh, I want to be an entrepreneur." But I did want to do something that was purpose led, and that's what I have kind of created with Be Inclusive.
Absolutely. Thinking about, the reasons you set things up, and looking ahead into next year, we're hoping to release this, I think, January 2025. What are some of the most pressing challenges facing marginalised groups in hospitality and events?
Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying that the hospitality industry, as is every industry, is reflective of the society that we live in, right? So it's not a sector issue, it's a societal issue, but it shows up in each industry in different ways. And so with hospitality, and the nuances there are that diversity is not an issue. Like the research that we produced 4 years ago told us that almost 18% of the industry identifies Black, Asian, and ethnic minority. And in knowing this and knowing that, for many events that we would attend, and for many businesses across the board, there are none of these people from these backgrounds, or very limited people from these backgrounds in decision making positions. And it begs a question as to why. Because hospitality obviously talks about often the career pathways that are available and possible, but if they're not accessible to everyone, then then that's reflective of a kind of wider issue. So I think you only need to be in hospitality and look around any rooms that you're in, whether it's an award ceremony, events, or boardroom, to tell you what those problems look like and how they kind of materialize. So,
Yeah, yeah. So it's an interesting point you make. So we have to try and connect. It's not just what we do in work, which is obviously really important, but connecting that to how we approach life outside of work, and sort of
of
making sure
course,
we
because
are.
yeah,
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
definitely. And I always use the example that we don't show up at work as someone that we're not outside of work, like we're the same
Mm.
person. And
Yeah.
so, if you are an inclusive leader, then what does that look like? And how do you show up outside of work? And where are the gaps? Quite simply, um, you can't separate the two. And through a lot of the learning that we do in the industry, and we usually do exercises about your trusted 10 and who you spend the most time with. And
Mm.
it's really impossible to be closed-minded in life and open-minded at work.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. Could you, obviously, if you can't go into it with too much detail, not expecting you to give away your whole session for free, but the trusted 10, could you just dig into that? Because I think it could be quite a good exercise, again, as a starting point for people to just start thinking about these things. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, Trusted 10, it's not an exercise that I created. It's an exercise that's out there in the ether, but ultimately just sitting and thinking about the diversity that sits within your immediate circle, the trusted 10 people that you spend the most time with.
Mm.
Because ultimately we are sponges and we absorb information from not only the media we consume, but the people that we're around. And the purpose of the exercise is to get people look at where to really reflect on where there are gaps and how they are learning about difference. And that's just a really important starting point because if you don't understand, barriers or obstacles that different people to
Mm.
yourself face, how do you then become an inclusive leader? Because it's about empathy and it's about understanding difference. I think it speaks to a lot of the learning and development that we deliver, which is theory is one thing and understanding terminology, but actually, in order to move the dial, it requires collective individuals to behave, act, and show up differently in the workplace and make different decisions, informed decisions in a way that they haven't previously. And it's about individuals and how we think and how we engage. So, yeah, all of our work really centers like real personal and professional development on how we look at the world and how we look at our teams.
So it's such a good point. I think it's that exercise especially. I was just thinking about it then as you were speaking, and I was thinking, well, actually, yeah, I've probably got some work that I need to do. I don't know what your experience of this would be, but I think often maybe leadership can fall into a thing of thinking, right, we need to do some EDI, we need to sort of make some positive change, but they go about it from that sort of work mentality, whereas actually sort of stepping back and thinking about themselves as a whole human is a good starting
Mm,
point, potentially.
it really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
I was looking, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about these sort of topics, and I got chatting to a colleague about how those who are not perhaps in leadership positions yet, what change can they make? Because it is hard, obviously, if you want to make your workplace more inclusive, which I think is probably a good starting point at the very least. Are there ways that those in sort of entry level and maybe earlier in their career, is it their place to have to do that? And if it,
Mm,
how can they, try and influence positive change in the places they work?
yeah. Yeah, the onus isn't on them.
Yeah.
It's like saying to women, okay, gender equality, inequality is a problem, fix it, women.
Mm.
The onus isn't on them. I think what we can do as whether it's women or people of color, is equip ourselves to move forwards and upwards as anyone would from a professional development perspective. But the onus isn't on like marginalized groups to address societal issues or systemic issues
Mm.
that exist within their organization. Because ultimately, in terms of driving change, it requires power and influence. And influence is something that I believe can happen at any level of your career. But actually, yeah, the onus isn't on them to address an issue that they didn't create.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, this was an interesting discussion we had because obviously, I think it can be difficult sometimes for people if they're in a situation they want to make change, but obviously they don't have the power to do that. It's a tricky one.
Mm.
Going back then to leaders.
Influence though is a thing though, and I think
Yeah,
what really excites me about a lot of the kind of younger generations that are coming up, they're unafraid to speak their mind, and they're also willing to vote with their feet. And
yeah,
there's been a lot of research conducted on it. I haven't got the stats, but you know, a lot of the kind of younger generation aren't willing to work with for businesses whose values don't align and don't care about things that are important from a societal
mm,
perspective too. So influence is definitely a real thing, and I do think that those who are not in leadership positions can influence the industry. But one of the reasons why we have a multi-pronged approach is because we recognize A, we want to support and equip our community to access sometimes professional development they otherwise wouldn't access. But at the same time, we need to work with leaders in the industry for them to wield their power and to help drive change. So both are definitely necessary, amongst other things as well that I think can support change.
going back to leaders then. So if you're working with leaders, where do you start when you're trying to, let's say you've been brought in to do some consultancy work, or even you're just sort of meeting somebody and you're interacting with them and you can tell that they're in a leadership position, they maybe have indicated they want to sort of review how they're doing or make some changes. Where do you start, or does it depend on each organisation, each context?
I mean, with every organization, the two really important starting points is education and data. If you don't educate yourself or are educated on the topic, when you have the data, you don't know what you're looking for.
Mm.
So, education is key. And that's a combination of self education or reaching out to businesses such as my own or other agents of change to get formal ED&I training and workshops. So, education is definitely the most important starting point, I would say.
Part of your work is the mentoring, which you've mentioned before. How does the Elevate scheme work? And I believe
Yeah.
are you preparing for next year? Is that right?
Yeah, we've got two schemes that go live next year. Elevate isn't really a big part of our work, so it's one of the professional development initiatives that we deliver and we have
Mm.
delivered for the past few years. So it's a part of what we do for sure. It's a 6 month scheme, and we pair industry leaders with members of the community for a 6 month period. The one that goes live in January is for restaurant founders. So we've got some amazing businesses like Hawksmoor, like Wolseley Hospitality, like Gaucho, who are mentor businesses, and they're mentoring business owners, 10 business owners from our community to help them move their businesses forwards and upwards. And it's something we're in is it the fifth year or fourth year? I think I can't remember. It's either the fourth or fifth year of running this scheme. And, the reason why we even started there is simply because we knew we had the leaders, we had the community, and it felt like quite an easy starting point. And what we've done
Mm.
over time is formalize the process. We've got a mentorship platform that we use, and it's yielded really positive results, as in we've seen people move forwards and upwards throughout their careers and continue to. So it's super positive initiative.
Have you had any mentors during your career that have sort of helped you
Oh, of
sort of on
course.
your
Yeah,
path?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Throughout my entire career. And some of which being informal, some of which formally. But I think mentors are invaluable through all areas of your life. And I think that's professionally, personally, in anything that you do in life, there is someone who are 10 steps ahead of you that can advise you and guide you. And so I am a huge advocate of seeking out mentors at any point in your career, but also in your personal life too.
Do you think there's qualities that make a good mentor, or one or two that you see across all of the mentors? Is there sort of like a
Yeah,
common theme, or again, do people have different sort of strengths that they bring?
it depends on the nature of the kind of mentorship relationship. So in a formal capacity, um, like for the Elevate mentorship scheme, they need to listen, they need to be empathetic, they need to be effective communicators, Knowledgeable is really important because if you think about
Mm.
mentorship and why we run mentorship schemes, it's really around connecting our community with subject matter experts that can impart on that information and knowledge, and also openness as well, because every mentor that we've worked with to date has always told us that they get as much from the scheme as the mentee does. So I think all of the above super important, but the list is probably really extensive. But I think the same qualities that make a good leader make a good mentor.
Mm. Yeah, amazing. I would agree with that. I would agree with that. You touched on obviously the other sort of parts of the work that you do. So one of the things I've seen on your social media are the trips that you set up, where you're taking people. I definitely think I've seen one where you've gone to like a vineyard or like wine tastings and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about the thinking behind that?
yeah, sure. The reason why, I mean, this year in 2024, we went to Italy. We did some English vineyard trips, but we also did some the year before. And it speaks to the fact that formal education is super helpful for us all, but it's not the only way to learn. And so we do fund qualifications, but actually, when surveying the community and when we have in the past, they've spoken about the idea of building social capital, be the value, along with practical learning opportunities. And so the vineyard serves both actually. So people are able to
Mm.
build networks, but also to learn hands-on learning for their designated or preferred career path, which is has been in wine in those two instances.
And if there are people, whether it be a supplier, supply chain, or they're a vineyard, or they're a venue, are there ways for them to get involved in various
Yeah,
schemes that you
I
run?
guess I guess really importantly is that every scheme, educational trip or program that we run is funded.
Mm.
So really importantly, any business that gets in touch, whilst we absolutely do appreciate volunteers and support, it needs to be funded so that we can deliver it. And I think that sometimes a misconception, especially when we mention that we're a not for profit or social enterprise, is that we are a service provider just like out here delivering things for free, and our community obviously core and essential to what we do, but in order to have a team to deliver these initiatives they need to be paid to do so. But we are open to any organization within the hospitality, food or drink industry that are keen to support our community to move forwards and upwards within their careers. But it's just a key consideration that there does need to be funded associated, otherwise we can't deliver it.
Yeah, if you're going to do it, you want to do it right and do it.
Well,
You want the
yeah,
experience to
absolutely.
be, yeah, exactly. Looking ahead into next year, obviously I mentioned in the
Hmm.
intro, you've got an extensive background in procurement, supply chain. It's looking to be an interesting year. It's probably the most diplomatic way I can put it for operators.
Hmm.
Costs rising, new implications from the budget coming in. Is there anything that you would be thinking about if you were an operator in terms of how venues can run efficiently? Should they be looking at certain things in their supply chain, their procurement processes?
Um, I would suggest that they are crystal clear on how they're spending their money. And what I mean by that is when you're running a restaurant or hospitality business, there's so many costs to consider, and there sometimes can be uh, which makes sense, like um, a a focus on the big spend items. Obviously, energy is huge, food and drinks huge, but there are often service contracts that support the running and operation of the business that are overlooked, and that can sometimes lead to businesses paying a premium when they shouldn't be. So, really importantly, I would just say ensure your costs are being managed, and are the lowest possible that they can be for the service or product that you are procuring. But I would also say never underestimate the cost of recruitment, because it obviously costs businesses to recruit new people and to train them. And so it's for that reason why I think it's really important that equity, diversity, and inclusion remains on the table, because if you're able to retain people, people feel as though they're included, and want to thrive within your organization, that's one headache that you needn't worry about because of stability of workforce.
Yeah, it's something that people just don't think about when they think about sort of running costs and stuff. And also, to your point, it's retaining the staff, but also making sure that you are seen as an attractive, open, tolerant place to work, so that people are wanting to come
Yeah,
to you versus you having to constantly be sort of running campaigns, going to market, and trying to sort of draw
yeah,
candidates in, if that makes sense.
definitely.
Yeah. So you're very well connected across the industry. You're speaking to leaders quite regularly. Do you have any other sense or predictions about what we might see going into next year, or is it still a little bit up in the air?
I mean, it's going to be an extremely difficult year for the industry that we know. What that looks like is going to be extremely difficult to predict. I mean, I, I I do think since exiting the pandemic, every year has been extremely different, but all incredibly tough. And this coming year will add the financial pressures, as you mentioned, in terms of NI and budget changes. So it's going to be extremely difficult, is what I'd say. I think everyone's predicting the same. Hospitality, as always, as an industry, kind of weathered the storm, but I do think there are going to be casualties as a result. It's over, it's long been incredibly difficult to run and manage a successful hospitality business, and that's just going to get even more tough.
Yeah, it is going to be really tricky, but I think, yeah, starting next year, thinking about what we can do to, yeah, make our workplaces a bit more diverse and, and equitable is probably
They
going
are
to
diverse
bear
already,
fruit.
remember.
That's true.
They're
Yeah, actually,
already
it's a good point.
diverse.
Thank you for reminding me. We spoke about this before in our first call. Why don't we dig into that point, because it's you're right to pull me up on it. So the difference between sort of diversity and being diverse and being inclusive, I think, is quite an interesting point
Hmm.
that I think sometimes people don't grasp. So could you speak to that a little bit further?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as mentioned, diversity is a fact, it's a number. And when we look at the stats for the industry is extremely diverse. But inclusion is an act and it's a feeling and it's how you feel when you're at work. It's how you feel in any environment, whether you've been included or considered. But really importantly, it's the equity piece that really needs focus because there are a number of groups from various protected characteristics that are present and represented within our industry, but don't necessarily feel included and don't necessarily feel as though they have a fair and equal opportunity to progress and to forge longer term careers within the industry. And so, for any business that we work with, we always steer them in the direction of inclusion and equity. That should be the focus because if you focus on inclusion and equity, the diversity beyond what is already there will come. But diversity is simply a metric and it doesn't signal anything, to be honest.
I guess you can have a very diverse workforce, or you do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good environment for people.
Inclusive.
Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, yeah. One point that I'm always interested on, this is from talking to people about this topic. I think sometimes people don't quite know how to start these conversations and whether they should, because it puts a lot of pressure, I guess, on marginalised groups, people from minority groups, if people are sort of constantly coming up to them saying, "Oh, what do you think about this?"
Yeah.
It's something I've seen
Yeah.
content written about it, the extra
Yeah,
pressure
me too.
that adds.
Yeah.
And have
Yeah.
you experienced that? I'm guessing you have.
I mean, I think I'd start by saying the answers don't lie with the marginalized groups. That's the first thing.
Mm.
And the second thing is, I have faced that. I've been at like events where I'm having my wine and my dinner, and someone's like, "Oh, why do you think that issue is?" And I'm like, it's not a conversation for today, to be honest. And so, the thing is, dependent on who you are, your background, your experiences, it's never going to be an easy conversation to start. But it's also
Mm.
not the kind of area that you can be a bystander on. You're either actively part of the solution or you're doing nothing at all, and there's no in between. So that doesn't detract away from the fact that it can be uncomfortable, but the alternative is to do nothing, and it's really choosing which what side you want to be on, really.
Mm.
And just going back to what I'd mentioned about education, like the more you are educated, the more you learn, the more you practice, the more comfortable you become. And it's like with anything, like that confidence muscle that's flexed, the more it's used.
I wasn't sure quite what the answer would be, and again, apologies if it's not the right question. I've spoken to people that have had that same experience of weird contexts where people come up to them and they're like,
Yeah,
"This is not
I had
this
it
is
in a,
not the place." And
I had, yeah, it's just not the time, and it's like, I tell you what it does. It centers the person wanting to learn because they're not considering how this person might feel, whether the circumstances are even appropriate. They're
yeah,
centering what they want to learn, and
yeah,
it happens all the time. But I've just become very good at just making it clear that it's not appropriate, like here and now,
yeah.
and we can have a chat another time. But now is not the time. Whilst it's
Or
a,
even it's
you
not
know,
appropriate now, and it's also not something that
not
I was
appropriate
used
ever.
before. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree, I
which is a
agree.
hard thing for people to hear, but
And that's a really good point because, yes, there are formal education and trainings out there, but actually we're in an information age. There's so much data out there, information out there, books, podcasts, the list
yeah.
goes on and on. Like, be willing to do the work yourself. No one's going to hand you that education, and it's sometimes just not appropriate to ask people about their lived experiences, especially when they're not particularly positive. Because who wants to relive that over wine?
Yeah, in a weird context. No, absolutely, absolutely. No,
It is, it can
thank you for
be.
your honesty with that
It's okay.
answer, because I think it's through having these conversations that hopefully we can yeah
Agree.
educate people, get them on
Agree.
the right path.
Agree.
We'd like to sort of finish up with asking people what their one amazing experience is. So this could be an event that you've been to as a guest, or an experience that you've had through your work in the industry, or it could be a bucket list idea that you would like to realise at some point. What would your experience be?
Um, One amazing experience. I've got two kind of. So
That's fine.
one is which I'm big into live music, and 8 years ago now I went to a place called Set in the south of France, and they have a world music festival every year, and went to this amazing venue, which I can't remember the name of now, but this venue is open top, and the view that you see from the stadium like music venue is the sea. So just a really stunning environment, and saw one of my favorite artists ever. And because of the setup of the venue, like we were like a couple of feet from each other, like a
Wow.
American artist called Anderson .Paak. It was just amazing. But the view and the setting was just so beautiful and stunning, and the weather was good. It was just an amazing experience. So that's one. The second would have to be our awards. So we have our own BIH Spotlight Awards. And, we've created something that doesn't otherwise exist within the industry, which is a space that celebrates ethnically diverse founders and employees in the industry in a really grand and glamorous way. And it brings together all our partners and our community. So every single year, it's a spectacular event, just filled with great energy, joy, connectivity, great food and drink from the community. So each and every year, the come down of that is probably like a week or two.
It looks like a fantastic evening. So,
Yeah, it is.
Lorraine, thank you so much for sharing your one amazing
No
experience. Where
problem.
can people find out more about yourself and the work you do,
Yeah,
and how to get in contact or
yeah,
for help?
sure. So we're on all of the social media platforms, from LinkedIn to Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. So it's Be Inclusive Hospitality is the handle. And our website is www.bihospitality.co.uk. Super.
Lorraine, thank you again.
No problem. Thanks for having me.